everyone! Welcome to an episode of Jayda InStitches, specifically the crown. Alright, not really. But today we are going to do a crown costume piece for upcoming Halloween. This actually came up in a live stream a few weeks ago, and we said we would do a crown, and here it is. Today's tutorial is going to show you how to make this to fit you or anyone else, because today's pattern is not based on a specific stitch count. It's only based on a foundation chain row that fits very snugly around your head. So when you're trying this on, or on the person you're going to make it for, make sure that foundation chain row fits very snugly when pulled taut around your head, so all the way around, behind the ears. So not over the ears, behind the ears. We want a nice tight fit so that it sits up on top of your head where a crown should sit. You can use any yarn you want for this, any fiber, and any hook that allows you a nice tight tension. So the yarn and hook we've chosen for this project, if you feel the hook and the yarn together that you've got doesn't create a tight enough stitch, then go down a hook size or maybe thicken up the yarn you're using. This is a scrap project. You don't need a whole lot of yarn for it. But you do want nice tight tension, so keep that in mind when you're working on it. Tight tension creates a lovely stiff fabric so that the points of your crown will always point up. You can also get fun and creative with decorating your crown. We're going to show you how to make some crochet gems, really simple ones, or raid that button closet and see what you've got by the way of buttons or beads or plastic gemstones, so long as they're all nice and lightweight, because you don't want anything to pull down the points of your crown. Alright, enough pre-chatter. Let's grab our royal hooks, our royal yarn. We'll head on over to the craft table and we'll stitch it up together. Please visit our shop and purchase a pattern. It helps support our show, and we'll put a link to our shop in the description box down below. In order to make our crowns, we want around 25 yards of a size 4 medium weight yarn. I'm using acrylic in a nice golden color. If you want to add some crocheted gemstones, then some small amounts of yarn in various gemstone colors is also good. You have the option of adding buttons to this project, so you can use buttons in lieu of crochet gemstones. I recommend plastic, lightweight, solid-faced buttons with a little toggle on the back for sewing. If you're making this crown for children under the age of 4, I recommend against buttons and to go with the crochet gemstones instead. If you are adding buttons to your crown, you're going to need a needle and thread. We also need a pair of scissors, a yarn needle. You may wish to have a measuring tape, and the hook we're using is a 4.5 millimeter, also known as a size 7. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. We're going to start with a slip knot, and we're going to chain a length that fits very snugly around our heads, or the head of the person you're making the crown for. So it's helpful to have the head handy. And somewhat tighter than normal tension is also good for this project because we want to create a stiff fabric. So the number of chains in your foundation chain row doesn't matter at all, as long as it fits all the way around your head, and that's around the back, over your forehead, and above your ears. Nice and snug. The circumference of my head is around 22 inches, and I have chained 75 chains. Now again, the number of chains doesn't matter so long as it fits snugly around your head and almost on the tight side, because acrylic yarn and the stitch we're going to use does have a tendency to stretch a little bit, so make sure you've got a length that fits very snugly around your head. Try not to twist your yarn. It helps to grab your foundation chain and just run it between your thumb and forefinger, and that will help it to not twist on you. Grab that first chain you made, and we're going to join with a slip stitch to make a large ring, and this is the base of our crown. So the whole crown is going to be built onto that. We're going to chain one, and into the same place that we joined, we're going to half double crochet. Now you can half double crochet using just the top loop or using both of the top loops. It's up to you, but a little bit of consistency is best. That's what makes a first row look nice and even. So I'm just going to half double crochet into each chain all the way around, and I'm slipping my hook underneath both of those loops. But again, you can just use the top one if you prefer. Once you've half double crocheted in every single stitch all the way around, and you get back to the very beginning, you're going to join with a slip stitch to that first half double crochet you made, and the number of stitches in your first row will be exactly the same as the number of chains in your foundation row. If you're one off or one under, or you don't remember the number of chains you made, don't worry about it. As long as it looks even and it still fits over your head, that's all that matters, because this is a costume piece. We're going to chain one, half double crochet in the same place that we joined, and you're going to half double crochet in every single stitch all the way around. But this little guy right here, this is called the false stitch. It sits right up against that little chain one. We're going to ignore that this time. So half double crochet in every stitch all the way around, except that last little stitch that butts up against that little chain that began the row. At the end of row 2, we're going to skip over top of that little stitch there. We call it the false stitch. And instead we're going to join with a slip stitch to the top of that first half double crochet. And this is going to keep our seam from moving away on us. One more row of half double crochet. We're going to chain one. Instead of working into the same stitch that we joined in, we're going to miss it and we're going to half double crochet into the very next stitch. And when you get all the way back around, you are going to use this little stitch. So that's basically going to keep our seam nice and straight at the back of our crown. So half double crochet into every single stitch all the way around, including this little guy. And I'll see you back at the beginning. At the end of row 3, work your last half double crochet into the false stitch. That's that little stitch that sits right at the bottom of the chain one that began. And if you pull it apart, you can see where we skipped over that joining stitch from the previous row. We want to slip stitch to join row 3 in the top of the first half double crochet stitch we made, and that completes the base of our crown. You can take a moment to snip your yarn, fasten off, and weave in your short tail. So if you worked over top of your first short tail down here like I did, that will just leave you with one, and you want to weave it in underneath some of those stitches on the inside of the crown. Back and forth once or twice, and it shouldn't want to come out. Once you have your tails woven in, you're going to squeeze your crown in half so that you're looking at your back seam roughly in the very middle of your flattened crown. So flatten it roughly in half so that that's the very middle, and then flip it over. Take your yarn needle and mark the stitch that's directly opposite your back seam. So there's your back seam, flatten it in half, and mark the stitch that's directly opposite. We're going to take our yarn and make a slip knot, and we're going to do a little bit of work at the front of our crown. So we're going to take a look at that marked stitch, and we're going to back up 6 away from it. So here's the marked stitch, and we're going to count backwards 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the stitch. We're going to join our yarn in. You're going to slip stitch to join. You can leave that tail out to the back, and you can look after it later by weaving it in. We're going to chain one. We're going to half double crochet into that same stitch. So I'm just going to work over top of my short tail, but you can weave it in later. We're going to half double crochet now in each of those stitches all the way up to that marked stitch. So there's the marked stitch right there. I'm going to take my needle out. So I'm crocheting into the marked stitch, and now I'm going to crochet by half double crocheting into each of the next 6 stitches. So we have 6 half double crochets on one side, a half double crochet in the marked stitch, and 6 half double crochets on the other side. 13 in total. That's 13 half double crochets all worked across the front middle of our crown. We're going to chain 1, turn, half double crochet in the first stitch, and half double crochet in each stitch all the way back across. You'll still have 13 half double crochets worked across this front portion of our crown. At the end of that short row, you'll have 13 half double crochet. We're going to chain 5 now. And we're going to create a point for our crown. We're going to skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the second chain, single crochet into the next, half double crochet into the next, and we're going to double crochet into the last chain. We're going to turn our crown so that we're looking at it like this. You're going to skip, so this little stitch kind of counts as being worked. Skip the next 2, so the first 3 altogether, and slip stitch into the next stitch. And that is the first little point at the front of our crown. We're going to slip stitch into the next stitch, and we're going to create a slightly larger middle point. So we're going to chain 6, and very similar to the last one, we're going to skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the next, and then single crochet into the next, half double crochet into the next chain, double crochet into the second last chain, and into the last chain we're going to treble crochet. So that's 2 yarn over the hook. Pick up a loop. You'll have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over, back through 2, yarn over, back through 2, yarn over, back through 2. There we go. So that's the middle point of our crown. We're going to skip 3 stitches, slip stitch into the next stitch, and slip stitch into the stitch after that. So there's points 1 and 2 made. And now we're going to repeat this little guy. We're going to chain 5, skip the first chain from the hook and slip stitch into the second chain, single crochet into the next, half double crochet into the next, and double crochet into the last chain. Skip 2 stitches and slip stitch into the last stitch. Try not to split your yarn. There we go. Nice and tight. And these little guys will stand up on their own. So that's the middle front of our crown. From this point, we're just going to slip stitch down the edge. So very minute little slip stitches. We're just basically going to get our work down to, if you just maybe do 2, right down to the bottom of that last stitch, right there, and that will get covered up in a little while. We're going to slip stitch into the next stitch, and then we're just going to make a series of points all the way around the crown. So we're going to chain 4. We're going to slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, single crochet into the next chain, half double crochet into the last chain. You're going to skip a stitch and slip stitch into the next stitch. You're going to slip stitch into the next stitch, chain 4, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, single crochet into the next chain, half double crochet into the next chain, skip the next stitch along your crown and slip stitch into the next stitch. So we're just going to be making little points all the way around the edge. You start by slip stitching into the next stitch, chaining 4, skip the first chain from the hook and slip stitch into the second chain, then a single crochet, then a half double crochet, skip a stitch and slip stitch into the next stitch. You're going to repeat that all the way around until you get back to over here, and once we get back here, again, it doesn't matter what your stitch count is, we're just going to squeak in one last point. It'll either work out perfectly or you'll have to skip a stitch or just sort of anchor it creatively around here, but we'll get to that. Go ahead, work on your little points, and I'll catch up with you back at the front. When you get back around to the beginning, if you've got 3 stitches left, then that works out perfectly. You can work in another one of these little points. If you have 2 left, you're going to sneak in a point. If you only have 1 left, then you're going to skip it altogether. So for example, I have 3 left, so I'm going to create another full point. If I only had 2 left, I'll show you what I would do. Let's get this last point made here. Slip stitch, single, and half. So I'm skipping a stitch and I'm going to slip stitch in here. If you only had 1 stitch left, you would just slip stitch in there. And if you only had 1 stitch left after you'd finished your last point, you would just skip over it entirely and just slip stitch into the stitch at the bottom of that front piece. So however you need to squeeze in a last little point, don't worry, it will disappear once we've worked our final little border. And this is the border. We are going to single crochet right up the edge of that front piece, and you'll probably get maybe 3 single crochets worked into the edge of that little piece. So a single crochet anchored in the bottom of the front first row, 1 in the second, another one maybe near the top, and then you've got actual slip stitches, or I should say chains and single crochets, or chains and stitches to work into. So a lot easier to go up the first side. You want to get a single crochet in the bottom of each of those stitches. Remember, the little ones have 4 stitches into the very top of that point. So just grab the loop, you're going to single crochet, and then you're going to turn it. You should have 4 stitches running down the front, very easy to see, into the same place you're at right now. Just single crochet again. So you're going to single crochet twice into that top loop, and then pick up the whole thing. And that first one will be tight because it was a slip stitch. So try to get a whole thing. If you can only grab one little loop of it, that's fine too. Tight is good. There we go. Single crochet into the next few stitches down there. That puts us right down at the bottom. So there's our first point. Then you're going to single crochet 2 stitches together across those 2 slip stitches at the bottom. So single crochet 2 stitches together right through those 2 places where those slip stitches were in between points. So we're just basically closing in the little space there. Then you've got 5 single crochets to work up the side of your middle point. Same thing, grab that little loop at the top. You're going to single crochet. From that single crochet in the top loop of your middle point, we're going to create a little fleur-de-lis. So we're going to chain 3. We're going to skip the first chain from the hook and slip stitch into the second chain and the third chain. Now we're going to chain 2, skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the second chain and into the same place where you worked the last slip stitch along that part. So you should see it. It's got, if you pull on it, it's got kind of an open space. So it's basically the base of that first little leaf. We're going to chain 2, skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the second chain, and then back into that same place, which is getting kind of large now, slip stitch. So we've got a little fleur-de-lis, and then right back here into that same place where you single crocheted in that top loop, we're going to single crochet again. So you've got a single crochet in that top loop, chain 3, slip stitch into the second and third chains from the hook, chain 2, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, and then back into that third chain down here, chain 2, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook and back in this base area right here, and then single crochet back into the top of that loop. And now you can continue. We're going to single crochet into each of these stitches all the way down that side, and that first one is tight, so try to get your hook through it as best you can. It's a slip stitch. There we go. And then you can slip or single crochet into each of those stitches all the way down that side. And there'll be 5 of them. That brings you to the space between points where you were slip stitching. So you're going to single crochet 2 stitches together between those 2 points just to keep it nice and tight. And now we're going to work on the last point. So 4 single crochets up the edge of the last point, into that top loop, grab it there, 2 single crochet, that kind of turns us around a little tiny corner, and then you're going to single crochet into each of those 4 stitches, and that top one's a tight one, so try to get both loops. If you can't, it's okay. I'm being picky here. There we go, haha. Ooh, that is a tight stitch. Come here, there we go. And then each of the next 3. And I'll kind of pull that out. So there's our 3 middle points. And now you've got 3 single crochet you can work down the edge here of that middle section. And that is the middle section of the crown. All we're going to do now is slip stitch all the way up and down the edges of those points all the way around the rest of our crown, and that's going to give it some strength. So you can be pretty liberal with your slip stitches. Start somewhere near the base of your points, slip stitch through the bottom of each of the stitches, put a slip stitch in that top loop, and then you can slip stitch back down. You don't have to try and grab that edge loop if you don't want to. Oops, I've split my yarn already. Let's try that again. Little slip stitch there. And then you can grab the front loop. We just really want the front of our crown to look really peachy. And then it's easier to grab those other 2 stitches going down the other side. You can skip one of the chains at the bottom and just zigzag across to the other one, and that will create a nice sort of line down the side of your point, and then slip stitch up the bottom edge of the next point, slip stitch into that top loop. You can just grab the front or the back loop of the slip stitch right next to it, and then get those actual stitches on the way back down. And then skip that and slip stitch down into the bottom of the next stitch. Now, it doesn't matter exactly where you place your slip stitches, you're just creating a border all the way around the rest of your crown, and that's going to just make those points stand out a little nicer and give them a bit of strength. They'll stand up when you're wearing it. Once you've slip stitched all the way around the top edge of your crown, and that's just sort of up the bottom into the point and down the other side and then between the two as you work all the way around, and we're going to make those all look a little pointier in a moment. Get to the last stitch on the bottom of your last point, pull up on your loop, and you're going to bring your hook in from behind near the bottom of that first single crochet you made. Grab your yarn, pull it back through, and then put your hook back in your loop and gently pull back on your yarn to tighten it up. Make sure you haven't pulled it too tight in the front. It's kind of like your last little chain. Then you're going to snip some tail, not too much. Fasten off, and you're going to just pull that tightly, but not too tightly, because you don't want that to look like pinched or too loose or anything. So just until you know that it's not going to undo on you, grab your yarn needle and you can weave in your tails across the inside edge of your crown. Before we do any decorating, you can take a moment to go around your entire crown and pinch your little points. Flatten out your front pieces. I like to pinch the points of all of my little triangles. Pull up on them a bit, pinch the tops. And that slip stitching was tight, but it is going to create a nice sort of stiffness to those points so that when we wear our crowns, they'll stay up nice and straight. And now for a simple little crochet gem. We're going to take any color you want and we're going to create a cinch circle. So you're going to cross your yarn over, put your hook through your loop, grab your yarn, pull a loop up on your hook, and then just chain one. That secures your little cinch circle. And into that cinch circle, you're going to work 5, 6, or 7 single crochet. So all of our yarn is going to be a little bit different, and depending on the hook you're using, 5 may be big enough, 6 may be big enough, 7 may be big enough. I'm going to do 6 just to sort of show you. Once you have 6, 5, 7, however many single crochet into that ring you want, pull on the short tail, cinch it up nice and tight, and you're going to join with a slip stitch to that first single crochet. There we go. And before you snip your yarn, you can take your crown and decide if you feel like that's too small or too big, and you can adjust the number of single crochet in that cinch circle to any number you want. I recommend staying under the number 16 because once you get into 16 single crochets, cinching it nice and tight so that you don't have a space in the middle becomes a little difficult. But if you're going to put a button in the middle of your gem, then a little bit of a space is not a bad thing. So go ahead, make as many of these as you want. Once you're done, you can snip your yarn, leave a tail to sew it with, because you're going to just sew it to the crown. You can weave that shorter tail in across the back under a couple of stitches and then trim any excess, but leave that long tail for sewing. First, let's sew on a couple of crocheted gems. So you can make as many as you want. You can decide where around your crown you may want to put them. Maybe you want them in the points, somewhere in the middle. Maybe you want them dotted all the way along the entire crown base. It's entirely up to you. I've made 2 and I'm going to put them both kind of in the middle bottom of my 2 flanking side points. So these are the 6 single crochet into a cinch circle size. Like I said, you could do them more single crochet or fewer. If you wanted a really big one, you could use the half double crochet stitch in the same method we made these guys. It's a little bit of experimentation. Everybody's yarn is a bit different. All you're going to do though, once you're ready to sew them on, is leave that long tail, thread up your yarn needle, put it in position. If you have to, you can pin it. I'm just holding mine. And you want to use the loops that sit directly beneath the stitch you're going to use. So there's the stitch, here's the loop. I'm not going all the way through my crown. And this is going to keep my stitches from showing on the other side. So I'm going to grab a piece of a stitch, grab the side of my little crocheted gem, and turn it around. I'm going to grab, say, this loop under that stitch, and that loop, and that stitch. And of course I've got 6 stitches to do, so I'm going to go around, do all of them. Now if you've got slippery yarn, you're going to want to tie a knot at the end when you're done. But if you're using a sort of a standard acrylic like I am, then you don't actually need to tie a knot. What you're going to do is weave your tail in underneath the first set of stitches. Depending on how many you have, you might want to do this in sets of 2 or 3. You're going to go around a couple times, and this is going to kind of create a 3D effect for your little gem. It's going to have the middle pop out a little bit. You can do this 2 or 3 times, or however much you've got the room for. I think I can do it with this once more. There we go. Very good. Trim any excess, and that should not come undone on you. And remember, this is a costume piece, so it's not like you're going to be wearing it constantly or putting it in the wash. I don't think. I don't know. Maybe you're the type who wants to wear a crown all the time. But that is the easiest way to put on a little bit of bling. And now we're going to sew on a button. I found a rather fantastic button in my collection that I'm going to use. It's got a nice regal coat of arms on it. I'm going to put that right in the middle of my crown in the front. I've got my needle and thread here, and all I did was take my needle, put my thread all the way through it, double it up, and sort of knot the ends together. That gives me a double strength thread. I'm going to flip my crown over somewhere around the middle back of my button. I'm going to anchor my yarn around, so I've taken my needle through that looped yarn, and I'm just going to anchor it onto that piece of crochet. Try to make sure that it, there we go. So I've anchored it onto my crochet, and now I'm just going to go all the way through to the front. And because my button actually has a direction, I want to make sure that I'm sewing it down in the correct direction. So my little buttonhole goes from top to bottom. And the first few stitches are the most important, and that will get your button to stay in place. And once it's in place, you can just run your needle in and out through that fabric. And if you don't use a needle and thread very often, take your time, take it easy, try not to poke yourself, and just sew your button on. Go through it 3, 4, 5 times until it feels nice and snug. Once you know your button's on there and it's not going to come off, you can flip your crown inside out, and we're just going to knot our yarn, or our thread I suppose in this case, by creating a loop. Run your needle through it. Do it a couple more times just to make sure it's not going to come undone on you. There we go. And then you can weave your needle in and out through some of the stitches, some of the yarn that's there, just like you would if you were weaving in a tail of yarn. There we go. And trim any excess. Always put your needle back in a safe place so you don't step on it by accident later. And you can go around your crown if you're done, re-pinch out all of your points, or you can continue to add more bling to your crown. And there you go, one crown. I think this might figure prominently in my Halloween costume this year. Not sure. Will I be an evil queen, or will I be something like Glenda the Good? I'm not sure. A little more thought is required. I might even make another one in a different color. I think this is a lot of fun. I put this together, had so much fun doing it that I already started planning all the decorations for a second one. Anyway, we hope you had fun making a crown along with us today, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an absolutely fantastic week. Bye, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.